Welcome or welcome back to Pewdiepie. I'm Zui and I hope you enjoyed today's video. But before we get right into it, I'm obligated to remind you to click either the like or dislike button, commenting something down below, and of course sharing the video so more people can see and enjoy it. This is very important as it helps with the YouTube algorithm. I want you to know that your help is greatly appreciated. If you have any suggestions or ideas for a story, my Discord link is in my link tree that is down in the description, as well as my Patreon and Ko-fi for any donations you may want to send my way. Every cent counts. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's video. It was 500 years ago when the war between the gods ended. The god of the lizard folk, Montgomery, had been banished with his kind into the mire of Stench, a large swampland in the southern region. The god of justice, Frederick, was stripped of all his powers and turned mortal, leaving society behind. He now lived somewhere in the western jungles as a hermit. Roxana, goddess of the afterlife, had been locked into the netherworld to rule the dead as she originally did. And finally, the winged angel goddess Chica, who betrayed her kin to bring an end to it all, returned to her throne in Celestia, where she ruled to this day peacefully. This left humans and the other races with the two gods of humanity, Lunar and Solar. Since ancient times, they enabled the rising of the morning sun and its descent. The two gods now live together in the town of Haven. Thanks to that, the city had become the biggest on the continent. Its proud castle beautiful and towering as the highest building above all of mankind. The two gods have chosen Heaven, as during the war it had housed countless refugees of humans, dwarves and elves alike. It had become a symbol of sanctuary, peace and protection. So the decision was only natural. The two gods had been ruling over the mortal world justly and fairly, despite the mental scars the war had given them. Solar was jolly and childish as ever, while Lunar was serious and disciplined. Both of them, however, had a strong sense of justice, and took rules and orders they had given quite serious. You were one of the many maids working in the castle. A newly hired one at that. You had only been working for a few months here, and were still getting used to the winding labyrinth of hallways and rooms the inner castle was. You were bursting with pride when you had been chosen to work here. It was quite the upgrade from your poor village. The servant quarters were located in a building in front of the castle's cathedral. The sun god took faith very serious and demanded that the servants, especially the lower ones, such as yourself, always had quick access to it. Your quarters were separated by men and women, with a shared common room. Here you were right now sitting. A piece of parchment had today's instructions for you written onto it, and you blushed hard. Sure, the first few were normal. Clean the floors of the western wing of the barracks. Assist the cooks in the hall of feasts for a banquet that would be held later this day. Tidy the gallery of heroes, which was mostly dusting of statues and making sure the countless portraits were in perfect alignment. But the last one on the list. Serve in the bathhouse. You blushed hard. The bathhouse was where the two gods would have ritualistic baths. Only one maid for each god was chosen for this once a month. This meant you'd be doing this many more times to come for the rest of it too. The entire day you pondered about it. In fact, it distracted you so much you stumbled once or twice. During your work, which was highly embarrassing. The cook even hit you on the head with a wooden spoon for your clumsiness. and while diligently cleaning one of the floors in the western wing, your butt hit a vase. Thankfully, one of the guards had been quick enough to catch it. He didn't scold you, just ogled you in a really lewd way as you apologized to him. And when it was time to prepare for your bathhouse obligation, you sprinted into the cathedral. You needed the advice of a holy priest. And as you explained your situation, the holy man smiled at you in a fatherly way. "My child," he said, "the highest honor has been given to you, and the simple fact that you, as of right now, aren't bursting with pride, but rather are afraid to disappoint your lords, cements this decision to be a good one. I'm certain you will be able to entertain them. Be kind, and follow any order you are given. That is all." 30 minutes later, you stood in front of the bathhouse. Another maid stood next to you. She'd be taking care of the other guard. She seemed anxious, neither of you saying a word. It was then the door to the inner sanctum of the castle opened. 2 silhouettes emerged, both tall, about 6 feet. Yet they looked so small next to the giant gate of the inner sanctum. They approached. One had his hands folded behind their back, the other crossed around their chest. It were Sun and Moon. The guards they walked past on their way to the bathhouse bowed deeply, some of them even going so far as to go down on one knee. And as the two stood before you and the other maid, your hearts were racing. Their bodies were in peak physical form. Sun was wearing a red robe, decorated with golden insignias, while Moon wore ceremonial ivory armor. Its cape had hundreds of golden stars woven into the material. The two of them were looking at you, quietly. They definitely were judging you. Moon took a step forward, looking intently at the two of you, before Sun could do as much as open his mouth. It was in this moment you noticed that the other maid was around your age, and she was quite attractive. You suppressed a chuckle. Of course the two of you would just be here for eye candy while the bath rite was performed. Yet still, you felt a little proud that your beauty was fulfilling enough to be chosen for this. Suddenly, the night god's hand took hold of your chin, forcing you to look at him. Sun was bubbly, with a face and body carved from rosy marble, round and beautiful. Yet Moon, his face sharp. The god's long white hair was held back into a ponytail that reached down to his hip. His eyes were almost entirely black, if it wasn't for 2 orange pinpricks in their center. Also unlike his brother, his ears were triangle-shaped, like those of an elf, rather than the oval human ones from Sun. With a cold face, he looked down at you. You could see no emotion, at least not right now. The man then turned his attention to the other maid. Sun was meanwhile biting his lower lip. He was a little offended. Moon was treating the two of you like meat, and he felt sorry. He was about to apologize for his rude brother when he suddenly grabbed your wrist. "This one is to my liking," he said. You looked at your hand in surprise. His grip was gentle. His skin soft and a little cool. Without another word, Moon then guided you inside. There were 2 entrances. The two of you took the left one. And the room you found yourself in was magnificent. The floor and the walls were made out of polished obsidian. It actually looked a bit slippery. The place was a round dome. There were no windows. In the middle was a large pool filled to the brim with a white liquid. Steam was emanating from it. It was warm and humid. The ceiling had a beautiful mural painted on it. It depicted a map of the kingdom. As you were busy gawking at the decadent beauty of the bathhouse, Moon walked up to a mirror that stood in front of the wall. Expectantly, he looked at you. You gulped and blushed as you rushed over to him. Slowly, gently, you helped him out of his armor. The material was quite light, probably made out of moonstone. Under his instructions, you placed the pieces on the ground next to him. You then undid the knot that held his hair back. Then you pulled over a nearby chair that he sat down on. The god sighed. It wasn't an annoyed sigh, more a sigh of relief. Ah, dear Maid, I have been wearing that armor all day. It feels good having air on my skin finally. He held up his hand as he stared at himself in the mirror. Right now his lower body was covered only by a simple loincloth. You admired his muscular body with a mild blush. Moon looked perfect. Not even elven men could compete. It was amusing in a way. Sun was the perfect human, and Moon the perfect elf. Suddenly the god spoke up. I shall comb my hair. In the meantime, please go downstairs and put pine oil, fir oil, and a dash of cinnamon into the fire. The oils are already in perfectly sized vials, so don't worry. You cannot put too much or too little into the flames. To reach the furnace room, go down the spiral staircase behind the pool. You cannot miss it. You gulped. Yes, my lord. Blushing, you proceeded down the stairs. The heat here was unbearable, and you really wanted to get this over with quickly. The other maid was here too. The room was separated into halves. On your left side was a large shelf with alchemical ingredients. All of them created a wonderful smell down here. On your right were two large iron fireplaces. Your co-worker was in the process of throwing stuff into the fire herself. She was blushing hard just as much as you. Oh God, I think I can't take this. He's so hot, she blurted out suddenly. I know, they both are, you agreed. The two of you squeaked like little girls. Have you seen his, you know? She asked suddenly. You shook your head embarrassed. No? Do you think we will? Her grin widened. She definitely had seen it. With a slight hint of jealousy, you turned your attention to the alchemy shelf. They're ordered alphabetically. Don't worry about it, said the other maid as she pointed at the wooden signs atop of it. Thanks. Soon your co-worker left as you collected the ingredients. As you poured the pine oil into the flames, however, you choked at a puff of smoke and dropped the vial right into the pits. Dang it. Of course, clumsy you would mess up even the simplest of tasks. But no time to think. This was more important than that. Quickly you made your way back up the stairs, face covered in soot. As you stepped onto the obsidian floor, Moon looked at you. For a moment he just stared, before then slapping his hand on his face as he started to hysterically laugh. You were confused. My lord? Did you do something wrong? And for just a moment you thought you'd die of shame. But then he stood up, dear Maid, please just look at yourself. Blushing, you walked over to his mirror, and you shook. Oh, you looked so indecent. Moon clicked his tongue before taking a small rag from a nearby glass cabinet. He dunked it in a cold, scented water of a wash bucket. Then placed one hand on your shoulder and forced you to sit on his chair. Like your father did so many years ago, Moon began to tenderly wash your face, with an amused smile on his face, humming quietly. You were so embarrassed. Your heart was racing, and you felt as if you were about to pass out. Your god was right now washing your face like a toddler. Minutes later, he just dropped the cloth in the bucket, gently resting his hands on your shoulders, his thumbs gently pushing into your back. That's better. He smirked. What's with that blush, my dear Maid? You could no longer look at the mirror. Your gaze slowly moved to the floor. You interrupted my hairbrushing with your dirt-covered face, he said after a moment. I'm sorry, my lord. Lunar chuckled. It's fine. I'd just like to tell you why it is important. 200 strokes. Not more, not less. 200? Yes, dear Maid. Followed by gently oiling them and massaging them at the root. You will have the honor of doing that in just a bit. He stepped away from you and walked up to the pool of white liquid. You watched as he unraveled the strap of his loincloth, dropping it without a second thought. You swallowed a big gulp of Xavier as you admired his perfect leg muscles and calves. His body was perfectly shaved. The only hairs he had were on his head and face, it seemed. He waded into the middle of the pool, his hair floating behind him like a silky veil. Moon turned and looked at you with a coy smile. Well, my dear Maid, are you coming or not? You felt like your chest was about to burst. He was serious, wasn't he? He just... After a minute of silence, he tilted his head, impatiently. Maid. With a shaking hand, you began to undo your uniform. But as you were about to open the last button, Moon spoke up again. Please do not forget the ceremonial oils from the drawer next to the mirror. Yeah, sure, you stuttered. After you had folded your clothes, you took out a tiny glass vial filled with purple liquid from the aforementioned drawer. Covering your nether regions with your other hand, you approached the pool. A nod of confirmation from your god later, you stepped into the warm liquid. It's milk, you said out loud. What did you expect, dear Maid? I don't know, maybe some sort of nectar of an extinct species or something, but not milk. Moon was amused. Well, I shall explain then, he said as you approached him. The warm liquid went just high enough to cover your chest, so it was a little bit embarrassing. So it was slightly less embarrassing. He turned around, giving you access to his hair. Pour a bit of the oil in your hand, and then massage it into my head and hair. For this, the man went on one knee, so you could actually reach his head. Your fingers gently caressed him, as he began to explain. Every god in this world, and the next, is born with but a single imperfection. For example, Lady Roxanne is prone to losing hair at around the winter season. Not like typical dogs, of course, but more genuine, empty patches. Lord Frederick has no sense of smell. Lord Montgomery's scales are horribly dry and require constant care to not become brittle. Lady Chica was born with 3 instead of 4 wings. And son, he doesn't have a navel of all things. You gulped. I shall tell you my imperfection. It is admittedly lesser than most. My imperfection is my hair. It cannot be cut, or at least the means to do so haven't been invented yet. Therefore, it is incredibly important to take care of it. When I was younger, I once entangled myself in it, and it had taken the combined efforts of myself and my brother to loosen the knots it had created. Plus, it easily becomes curly, and I find curly hair rather unsightly, at least on myself. You bit your lower lip. Such an adorable little story. I can sense you'd like to hear more stories, huh? Me, more from my childhood? Or more about the gods? Our rituals? I mean, maybe? Moon chuckled. Well, if you can be so kind then, bring me my golden comb and I shall tell you everything you'd like to know. With your hands covering your chest, you quickly huddled back to the mirror, taking his comb. Moon, meanwhile, sat down on a bench that was submerged in the milk. As you sat behind him, you started brushing his hair, slowly and carefully. Did you know, he began, after quietly enjoying your strokes, why these baths are so important to us? And why something as plain as milk is used? No, that's kind of why I asked. Our skin is pure. He raised his hand and looked at it. And milk is the purest of liquids. It represents fertility, eternal life, abundance. We gods do not bathe in it out of sheer decadence, but rather it is the only thing that can cleanse our bodies of dirt and skin. I see, White Lord. He smiled. It does feel nice though, you said. Yes, that it does. Moon submerged his hand in the liquid, cupped it, and guided it to his face. But instead of drinking it, he rubbed it over his skin, making a pleased hum in the process. You're doing great, dear maid. I feel clean and great. He now leaned back into you, resting his head on your chest. His eyes looked straight into yours. I could get used to this. A shame your lifespans are so short. The god smirked. But it doesn't mean we can't enjoy ourselves right now, can it? You blinked. Was your lord, your master, flirting with you? A lowly maid? He certainly must have a harem. You couldn't even think of competing with the women of his harem. He hummed. He could read your mind. Slowly he lifted himself and turned around. So is that what you think? Well, would you like me to do to you what I do to the women in my harem then? You screamed internally, and Moon smiled. Since you have given me such a great service, I shall grant your wish. His face came closer. His perfect face. Your instincts immediately took over. You latched onto his lips like a baby to its mother's breasts. He hummed amused and tightly wrapped his arms around you, making you feel warm, safe, protected, loved, but most importantly, incredibly excited.